Afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday. So, it's post-conference period now. Usually, traditionally anyway, this is when you start to get a bit of drama. Oh, hello, what's going on here? I've got a new button. Oh, no, never mind. Oh, I don't like that button. Forget it. So, the drama, the post-conference season drama seems to be kicking off with the China spy case. So, Kemi Badenoch has got some questions for ministers. I actually thought it might be Keir Starmer, but obviously he's out of the country. But I do want to go through some of these questions. So the Conservatives are. So what's happened is there was a particular case of a couple of men who had sort of infiltrated Parliament. This was some years ago, but infiltrated Parliament. Nothing directly to do with the government at the time, just Parliament in general, who were believed to be basically Chinese agents up to no good, trying to interfere in British politics. So there was a case, not a trial. No, there was no trial, but there was a case underway that the Crown Prosecution Service were making the decision as to whether or not they should charge them, right? And it looked like they would be charged, and then Liam's there saying more corruption, I assume. I don't actually know. It's possible. Then what happened is the CPS said they didn't have enough evidence to charge them. In other words, obviously what the CPS have to do is they have to make a judgment. Is there a realistic prospect of a conviction? Because if there isn't, you just waste court's time, you waste public money, and you waste their own time, which could be spent prosecuting other people, right? So they made that judgment. Now, this is where there's the Tories are trying to make some political angle to it, and there may be a political angle, by the way. So the Tories, let's start with the Tories' suggestion. So their suggestion is that because the UK government, the Labour government, want to foster good relations with China, that they either hampered the CPS or actively lent on the CPS to drop the case. Now, am I going to say that that will not have happened? No, I don't know that. Because if you look at it, it's purely circumstantial, but if you look at it this way, right? So when Labour came to power last year, they did actually take quite a strong line against China. So they were taking a very strong line on China. Then, the second it was announced that Donald Trump had won the election, they noticeably softened their stance against China, right? The reason, of course, is because if Trump was going to be a barrier to trade, and remember, although some people pretended to be surprised by all the tariff stuff, he'd promised to do it, right? In fact, he'd promised harsher tariffs than he actually implemented. So Labour had straight away at that point gone, Christ, well, he's going to hammer the global economy here. So they've obviously at that point thought that it doesn't do any good to then take that harsher line against China. So they noticeably softened their line against China and noticeably tried to move closer to them for trade purposes, right? So is it possible, is it plausible that the government, in order to do China a favour, or at least to stop relations getting worse, might have lent on the CPS to drop this case? It is actually possible. It doesn't mean to say that it therefore happened, but it is possible. Although I will point out that it is a bit of a cheek, the Conservatives accusing Labour of not defending us against a hostile state. And it's like, it's another case of Kemi Badenoch seemingly forgetting what her own party did in government. I mean, what about Russian interference, for example? They put a Russian oligarch with close links to the Kremlin, the son of a KGB colonel, who spied on Britain, in the House of Lords. And let him own newspapers. Absolutely mad. But I will point this out. So here's the sort of political spice to it, supposedly. So I ought to keep an eye on the latest news on this either. They're supposed to be asking questions. I thought they were supposed to be asking questions today. I may have to check that. Hold on. Oh no, maybe not. I thought there was maybe going to be questions of ministers today. Maybe there is. I'm just looking at the parliamentary business for today. I'm not seeing anything, but of course an urgent question could be asked or something or requested. I'm not seeing anything that says, no, it's not in the schedule. So maybe there's not going to be any drama today, but there will be drama coming, presumably at PMQs. So Kemi Badenoch has published 6 questions that she's sent to Keir Starmer. I'm going to go over those questions in a minute. But David there saying, I'd fire back with Russia report and Cameron's lobbying for a Chinese company. Oh yeah, you could. I would definitely fire back with Russia, not just the Russian report in general, but the things leading from it. But that in itself won't defend the government, right? That'll be like a tit for tat. But it's an absolute cheek, the Conservatives. But anyway, if we go through I will just point out, by the way, if anyone is like literally bored this afternoon and wants to chat, I am trying out my experiment. I've put it on the scrolly underneath. I am doing my experiment this afternoon. So I've cleared my decks. I'm basically going to spend all this afternoon playing computer games. But I'm going to stream on Twitch, just general political chat. So if anyone... And streams on Twitch are very different to streams on YouTube. Well, at least my streams on YouTube, because my streams on YouTube are reasonably structured. Not so on Twitch. So I'll put a link in the description below as well. But anyway, so here's her questions. So her question to Keir Starmer is your argument that no minister knew anything of the government's interactions with the CPS over the many months in which your government refused to give the CPS the material it wanted? Now, first of all, I've not heard anything about the government refusing to give the CPS the material it wanted. What the CPS have said is that what they wanted from the government was not material. What they wanted from the government was a statement that China is a hostile state, which obviously the Labour government are not going to do when they're trying to cozy up to China, right? But so basically what the Tory media are trying to say is that the case collapsed because the Labour government wouldn't designate China a hostile state. But that appears to be a nonsense. There's been multiple legal experts, including a former director of public prosecutions, and I don't mean Keir Starmer himself, who have said you don't need that. So the CPS are trying to say they don't think they could have secured a conviction without the UK government designating China a hostile state, whereas other legal experts have said, no, you don't need that. So that then raises questions, you see. So why have the CPS said that if a load of legal experts have said you didn't need the UK government to say that to secure a conviction? At the end of the day, have you got evidence these men were spying or not? Have you got evidence that these men were spying? It doesn't matter who they were spying for. You know, it could have been industrial espionage. Does the government have to assign a particular corporation as a hostile corporation to secure a conviction of industrial espionage? No, it doesn't. So that's a nonsense. So then you have to ask yourself, why have the CPS said it then? Given that legal experts have said that's a bollocks. It could be that the current director of public prosecutions is just an arse, or it could be evidence that the government have lent on them and they've just come up with some bollocks, right, to justify it. John, they're saying, how to solve a problem like China? We need the trade, but it's a security risk. It's a huge security risk. Do you know, I'll tell you what, do you know what the irony of all this is? So like I said, Labour were actually taking quite a hard line against China. So they were quite, I'm not saying hostile, it's probably a strong word, but should we say aggressive in their criticism of China all the way up until last November, when Trump was confirmed as having won the election. Now, here's the irony. Donald Trump, we know he's like too much of a friend to Russia, although even that there seems to be schisms there. But nonetheless, Trump is still, far too close to Russia. But he doesn't like China. So Trump is genuinely an adversary of China. He's not in China's pocket or anything. He is actually trying to take on China. So here's the interesting thing. Ironically, Trump, who actually does want to clip China's wings, he does want to take a fight to China, has actually encouraged encouraged America's allies to soften their stance with China, because the EU also were taking a harder line with China last year than they have been this year. So I even perceive evidence that the EU are a bit hesitant, at least, because they were taking a much stronger line against China last year than they are this year. So Trump, ironically, by trying to tackle China, has empowered them. Bizarre, isn't it? Absolutely bizarre. Dave, they're saying no more security risk than the USA at the present time. I actually think they are. No, China is a bigger security risk. China is much... I mean, everyone spies on everyone else, right? Who was it who got in trouble? There was something between Germany and America a few years ago. I think it was when Trump was president first time. Was it Germany getting caught spying on America or something? Or was it the other way around? But everyone spies on everyone else, right? But China, it's not just spying with China. It's the potential for cyber attacks. It's the fear of cyber attacks. I don't think the American government is going to launch a cyber attack. I don't think the American government is even working on the possibility of launching a cyber attack on Britain in the future, whereas China is. And we know China is because the FBI, with a few other American agencies, I did a video on it a while ago, some time ago, a couple of months ago or so, have basically released to the public that China has already set up ways of launching cyber attacks on America, as well as lots of other countries, including the UK. The FBI produced this letter, co-signed by various other agencies, including our own GCHQ, right? So our own security services. So no, China does represent a bigger threat than the US, but the US does represent a threat. And Labour know that the US represents a threat because, like I said, they noticeably softened their stance on China last November. Soon as the news came through that Trump had won the election, Labour went, like David Lammy, who was Foreign Secretary at the time, went from going to China, ooh, human rights abusers, to we'll talk about them in private. So, yeah. My granddad used to say, it's not the Russians we need to worry about, it's the Chinese. He was military. Well, we do need to worry about both. Russia is the most immediate threat, but Russia couldn't be as big a threat without China's support. China is the one that could credibly become the dominant country in the world. It could overtake America. Russia can't. Russia's got nothing. But anyway, go through these questions. Sorry, let me just go through these questions from Kemi Badnock again. So she sent these to Keir Starmer. She'll presumably bring this up at PMQs this week. Is your argument that no minister knew anything of the government's interactions with the CPS over the many months in which your government refused to give the CPS the material it wanted? It's a ridiculous question because obviously, yes, civil servants handle a lot of things, but something at this level will have had ministerial input, if indeed there was any input from the government at all. So in terms of the input that we know there's been from the government to the CPS said to the government, can you designate China a hostile state? And the UK government said no. Then her next question is, did ministers at HMT, the Treasury, Home Office or the FCDO, Foreign Office, ever brief you, the Prime Minister, about this matter or refer to it in any way? Did Jonathan Powell mention it to you at any point? So, I mean, that's going to be fairly straightforward. He will, of course, have been briefed at some point. So again, all he has to do is answer for these questions. The first question, is your argument that no minister knew anything? He could just say no. The second question, did ministers at blah, blah, blah ever brief you, the Prime Minister, about this matter? You can just say yes. Third question, is your government still denying that a meeting including Jonathan Powell and Foreign Office Permanent Secretary took place in early September? And if the government have officially denied that, which she's implying they have, I'll take her word for that, then he's presumably still going to say, yeah, that's still the position. Unless she thinks she's got evidence to the contrary. That, I suppose, if the government have done anything naughty, is probably the tricky question. Because if such a meeting took place, but then if such a meeting took place, it would have been foolish if the Home Secretary and Keir Starmer's own spokesperson denied the meeting took place. Like, you never deny anything in government, unless, of course, you know, you've got good reason to. Even if you don't think something happened, you never deny anything in politics, ever, unless you've got really good reason to. Then it says, ministers now say your national security advisor was not involved in the substance of the case and discussions around it. What does that mean? Well, presumably it means they were involved in the substance of the case and the discussions around it. Again, I mean, I don't know. In terms of what we know, what we publicly know, we don't know that there was any substantive discussions between the government and the CPS at all. Because remember, this isn't a government matter. The government can weigh in on it, but it's not a government matter. It's a Parliament matter. It would be the Speaker of the House of Commons who would have been involved in it. So it's entirely possible there were no great discussions between the government at all. There may have been, there may not have been. And then she asks, if he was not involved in the decision over months not to give the CPS what they needed, then who was? Again, Starmer can come back on that and say the CPS didn't need anything from us. They wanted us to designate China a hostile state, but this was not necessary. Then it says, does the government now accept that what Dan Jarvis told the House of Commons on 15th of September, i.e. the government had no warning and wasn't involved, was misleading? Will you ensure the record is corrected urgently? Again, it depends on what the government did know. You know, when they said they had no warning, what they meant was that the case was going to collapse. The CPS didn't have to tell the government that. Then it says, but we'll just have to see what the answer is. Because again, if he doesn't answer these in writing in the next couple of days, which he probably won't because he's out of the country, then she'll just bring them up at PMQs and claim he didn't respond to them. Is it still your government's position to claim that it would have been impossible to argue that China was a threat in court? If so, do you think the former head of public prosecutions, 2 former cabinet secretaries and a former head of MI6 are all wrong? Well, he can actually say, well, no, I think you'll find 2 former heads of public prosecutions, because he's one of them, doesn't think that. Because I've seen a report that an actual former DPP that wasn't Starmer has said that the CPS did not need the government to designate China as a threat in court at all. At the same time, the premise of her question may also be wrong. I don't know that the government have said that it would be impossible to argue that China's a threat, simply that they're not going to designate China a threat or that they don't believe it's a threat. But it is weird. But it is also very, very weird that you've got the Conservatives complaining about foreign interference in British politics. Because, yeah, if I was Starmer at PMQs, I would 100% bring up the Russia report. And do you know what I would do? I would actually say, I would actually announce, and he won't do, but I would actually announce there's going to be a proper root and branch investigation. Or put it this way, what he could do if he wanted to raise the temperature, he could say to Kemi Badenoch, but if it would put your mind at ease, would you lend your support to the idea of a root and branch inquiry into the nature of foreign interference in British politics? Do you want us to do that? We could do that if you want. We can do that if you want. O'Brien speaking French. I don't do French, I'm afraid. I'm just going to keep checking if there's any updates because I'm really curious as to if there's an urgent question being granted. The other news, by the way, today, which I may come on to tomorrow, again, if there's anything spicy, Reform UK have now decided that because their economic plans were being torn to shreds, they're not going to promise tax cuts after all. They've said, we think we can do the tax cuts, but we're going to cut spending first. So basically, they're blocking any attempts to say that their spending plans don't add up, because Reform UK are now suggesting they'll go into the next election promising with their fingers crossed behind their backs tax cuts, but without specifying what they will be, and saying that what they're going to do is cut public expenditure, and then when they've cut public expenditure, then they will cut taxes. Which is interesting, isn't it? It suggests that they know they can't win the economic arguments for their daft schemes. Now, the interesting thing is I'm seeing here Richard Tice is saying that what they're actually dropping is their 2024 manifesto tax cuts, but it's the same tax cuts as they promised this year, 2025. So I don't know if anyone's asked him, what does that mean about... So you're talking about your 2024 commitments, but your 2025 commitments are the same because they reiterated them. But anyway, John, coming back to this one, going by the rationale of the CPS, you can only prosecute a burglar if they are from a family designated a crime family. Well, I mean, it is a bit... I mean, I obviously don't know. I'm not a prosecutor and have absolutely zero experience of prosecutions in any capacity, other than reading about them in the media, where you only get a superficial view anyway. But all I can say is as soon as the CPS announced that they weren't going to charge, and the reason was because the UK government wouldn't designate China a hostile state, or they wouldn't, say in court that they are a hostile state. Several legal experts, including a former DPP, said that is not something that stops you charging them. They didn't say those people should have been charged because they've not seen the case notes. They didn't say you should have charged them. What they said is the fact that the UK government won't designate China a hostile state is not a reason not to charge them. Because they're not charging China. China's not in the dock, although inevitably if you charge someone for spying for China, in effect they are. But, it's two individual people who are both British, by the way, who would be in the dock. CPS are daft at times. Well, sometimes, I mean, it's not their fault all the time. They have to take a view on the likelihood of conviction. It may well be the likelihood... I mean, they don't put idiots in charge of the CPS. It may well be that there is some reason why the likelihood of conviction was remote, and they're just not being completely honest about what it is. Or it might actually be the government have lent on them. That is possible. I'm not going to sit here just because I'm a Labour supporter saying, oh, there's no evidence for it. There's no evidence at all. No, there isn't any evidence of it, other than the fact we know that the Labour government have softened their stance on China. They want a better relationship with China, and that prosecuting people for spying on behalf of China is not likely to do that. So there's motivation for the UK government to have lent on the CPS. It doesn't mean to say they did, but, Oh, Thomas there saying, afternoon from Clacton-on-Sea. No, we're just talking about your mate. Not your mate, but, your MP, Nigel Farage, when he turns up. Trashing his tax cuts promises. Aren't we marrying up to China going forward? Well, I mean, it's really this simple. The government any government needs... They need to think about the economy. Economy is the top priority for any country if you want to be elected next time round. America has made it harder to boost the economy. So does it make sense? We're trying to ease trading with the EU. So if you think about the three major markets in the world, not just from UK's point of view, they are just by far and away the three biggest markets in the world. The United States, China and the EU. So we're trying to improve trade with the EU, but that is not all that straightforward. I mean, despite the very welcome, commitments from the EU summit earlier this year, I mean, do point out the EU have said that they're not going to reduce their restrictions on UK trade until we have improved security at the Britain-Northern Ireland border, which is a huge sticking point. So, although we've got lots of nice sounding noises coming from the EU, in terms of concrete stuff, there are difficulties in us keeping to our end of the bargain. There are political costs with that. So that's not straightforward. Trade with America has, although we have ended up with a decent deal out of it, all things considered, trade with America has still gone down. We are still in a worse position than we were at the start of 2025, right? And because it doesn't matter, it's not just about, trade in general is like a network across the whole world. So it doesn't matter that our particular strand between Britain and America is not that badly off. The fact that America is hitting lots of markets around the world that we also trade with means that global trade is just being reduced. And that means, just in real terms, what does that mean in practical terms? It means the amount of money people are spending is going down because a lot of people are having to spend money on bureaucracy. Trump has basically increased the cost of bureaucracy, of trade. So the amount of money people have to actually buy goods and services is less, which includes from us. It doesn't matter that we haven't reduced our trade, for example, with, say, Australia. If Australia's trade has been hit by America, which it has, even though, again, they've got off reasonably lightly, but still, then that means, Australia may buy less stuff off us. So America has caused a material hit to our global trade. The EU, we're trying to improve it, but there's a lot of things we have to do before what was agreed will be implemented, right? And I don't know that the EU are convinced that we're really moving quickly enough on it. I don't think I know. I know Labour were very keen on, they were hoping the EU would say, can we just implement this? And then, because the annoying thing is for Labour, I suppose, is, first of all, Brexit's not their fault. Well, it's sort of, it's not in terms of the current leadership. And secondly, that doesn't matter because, of course, you do inherit the previous government stuff. You can't complain about it. But the other thing is they'll be thinking to themselves, so if they implement the full Windsor framework and they tighten security at the Northern Ireland-Britain border, right? So they tighten all that security, they tighten the checks, which will piss off, obviously, some people in Northern Ireland. And then the EU implement the deal that was agreed. Well, that will mean reducing some of that security. So from Labour's point of view, they were going, do we really have to tighten security only to loosen it later on? Whereas the EU, from the EU's point of view, they're, yes, because we want to know that you can stick to your agreements. So it's catch-22, isn't it? So basically, the improvements to EU trade, there are improvements. It is net better, but it's not going to be all bells and whistles just yet. So there are difficulties, is what I'm saying there. So what do? You look at the third market and see if there's any scope for improving things there, of course. I mean, that's the bind they're in. Not that I would be justifying it if they did lean on it. I don't think any government should ever interfere in judicial processes. So I wouldn't defend it if it turns out they have. But anyway, what is the progress, if any, on the big piece of legislation through Parliament? Have the Lords managed to water them down at all? So the Lords attempted to water down the Employment Rights Bill, but the government have said that they're not going to allow it. So they've sent that back. So again, if I look at it here, it's still... the two big ones I would say at the moment are the Employment Rights Bill and the Renters' Rights Bill. So at the moment, if you look up Employment Rights Bill, consideration of amendments. So at some Have they already done it? Hold on. At some point, MPs will basically turn those amendments down, and it goes back to the House of Lords, and it'll just be either the House of Lords at that point should just accept the government's position. I'm just going to see if it's already been done, because I can't actually remember. Oh yeah, it's already been done. So I thought it had. So just before conference season, MPs voted down all of the Lords' amendments, and so it's back in the House of Lords. The House of Lords at some point, now that Parliament's back in session, will presumably, well, they've got a choice. They can either accept the government's position. They go, okay, well, we offered the amendments, you rejected them, fine. And they should, by the way. The Salisbury Convention suggests that they should do that. Or they can decide to be difficult and put some back in, delaying it. I don't think the government are expecting the House of Lords to do that, because that would be a big move, which could be interesting if they did, because it might get Starmer getting on his right, I'm going to abolish you bastards again, which is in the manifesto anyway. I remember Blair causing a trial to collapse in 2006 due to continued weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. Yes, we do. I mean, we do know, we're not fools. We do know governments interfere in these things for geopolitical purposes, right? In order to sort of, yeah, we do know these things happen. And again, I'm not saying just because there's no evidence, you know, the government haven't lent on the CPS. The motivation is there to do it. The motivation's absolutely there to do it. The question is, first of all, have they done it? Just because it's like investigating a crime. You've got a motive. There's a motive. The UK government have a motive, but that's not the same thing as finding a smoking gun. So first of all, have the government interfered? And secondly, if there's no evidence they've interfered, is that just because they were very, 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 very careful about covering their tracks? But the thing is as well, it's a no-win situation for the government here, because the fact that the trial has collapsed is a bad thing. And I know innocent till proven guilty. We can't say for certain these guys were spies, by the way, because they didn't even face trial. But people will believe they were. People will believe there's no smoke without fire, even though you can easily make smoke without fire. I've just literally referred to a smoking gun. And then the other issue is, you know, so if there's no evidence at all that the government did interfere in the CPS, the Tory media can carry on behaving as if, well, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, you know, we know they've been taking a softer line on China. We know China would have reacted very badly to this trial, you know, and it's easy to get people to think the government probably did lean on them, even if there's absolutely zero evidence. Of course, if any evidence does emerge, then that will be shit it in the fan, big style. So it is usually the case. Again, we're in different times now, but traditionally, I tend to notice you do tend to get more drama occurring in this period between conference season ending and Christmas. So we'll see. This is like the first one, isn't it? You've basically got today the Tories trying to make something of, and there might be something to make of it, the China spy case, and Reform UK saying, oh yeah, tax cuts, yeah, let's forget about them, shall we? At least for now. We'll keep it as a semi-promise. But there it is. Anyway, we'll call it there. So, because I've got to get ready for another massive marathon stream, but on Twitch. So I'll leave it there for now. Like I say, link in the description below. From 1 o'clock today, like literally in 25 minutes, I shall be off. I'll just be pottering. I'll be pottering and amusing myself. But if anyone is in the chat, we shall just chat. And then Brian's last word there. Never attribute to malicious intent that which is easily explained by honest incompetence. Well, there is that as well. But in politics, of course, you do have to always add the little pinch of salt that there is always a corrupt motive in politics. But there it is anyway. Have a good rest of day. And until next time, I'll see you later.